Let's go to the US now, where Donald Trump has posted a $175 million bond in his New York civil fraud case. In February, he was found to have fraudulently inflated property values. It means he can now proceed with his appeal against a $454 million fine without the possible seizure of his assets. Mr. Trump claims it's all a political witch hunt. Of course, this is just one of several court cases he's facing, with others being criminal cases, with the potential for Mr. Trump to be jailed if convicted.
Okay, I need everyone to stop what they are doing right now, because what I am about to tell you is genuinely one of the most shocking developments in American political history, and I do not say that lightly. A federal judge has just imposed a devastating nationwide freeze on Trump's assets and his federal spending authority. And when I say devastating, I mean this is something that could literally end Trump's ability to function as both a businessman and as a political leader. This is not just another legal setback that gets appealed and forgotten about in a few weeks. This is a complete dismantling of his financial power, happening right before our eyes in real time, and the chaos this is causing throughout his political and business empire is absolutely unprecedented. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. And no, if you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Donald Trump's narrow escape from financial calamity is raising a few eyebrows today.
On November 16th, 2025, just days ago, a federal court issued an emergency order freezing Donald Trump's assets, including bank accounts and properties and key holdings in the Trump Organization. But it does not stop there, because this order also froze his federal spending authority, which means the federal government itself has essentially been put on ice until this situation gets resolved. We are talking about a complete lockdown of Trump's financial world and a massive disruption to federal operations that affect millions of Americans. The freeze is designed to prevent Trump from moving or selling or hiding assets, while a massive fraud judgment and related appeals play out in the courts over the coming months. And here is what triggered this nuclear option. Trump failed to post a required bond. The court demanded that he put up hundreds of millions of dollars as a bond to delay enforcement of a fraud judgment against him. Trump either could not or would not post that bond, and the judge decided that was the last straw. So Judge Arthur Ingram signed an order on November 9th that went into effect days later, and the language in this order is absolutely devastating for Trump. The judge stated very clearly that Trump cannot be trusted with federal spending authority until he complies with the law and respects court orders. Cannot be trusted. Those are the actual words the judge used. This move immediately blocks Trump from accessing his own money, which is already a nightmare scenario for someone who depends on cash flow to maintain operations. It prevents him from transferring interests in any of his businesses to anyone else. It stops him from using properties as collateral to secure loans or financing. Everything is frozen solid, and the Trump Organization is effectively paralyzed. Legal experts are calling this the most aggressive legal action ever taken against a sitting or former president in the entire history of the United States, and they are not exaggerating even a little bit when they say that. The freeze includes absolutely everything connected to the Trump Organization without exception. Trump Tower in Manhattan, frozen. Mar-a-Lago in Florida, frozen. Golf courses scattered across the country, frozen. Business ventures and partnerships and licensing deals, all frozen. The court has essentially taken control of Trump's entire financial empire and said you cannot touch any of this until we say you can. And lawmakers are now citing this freeze as a catalyst for potential reforms to presidential budget powers, because what we are seeing right now is exposing huge problems with how presidents can control federal spending. But here is where this gets even more insane and even more impactful for regular Americans who are not billionaires with business empires. The court also froze Trump's access to federal assets and spending power, which means federal agencies have been forced to halt normal functions. No new grants can be issued to states or organizations that depend on federal funding. No new contracts can be signed with businesses that provide services to the government. No benefits can be processed for people who are waiting for federal assistance. Everything is stuck in limbo until this freeze is lifted, and nobody knows when that might happen. Think about what that means for a second. Federal programs that millions of Americans depend on are now frozen because of Trump's legal problems and his refusal to post a bond that the court demanded. Veterans waiting for benefits, stuck. Small businesses waiting for federal contracts, stuck. States waiting for infrastructure grants, stuck. The entire federal government's ability to function normally has been crippled by this one court order, and the implications are staggering. Banks and Wall Street firms are already freezing Trump Organization accounts because they do not want to be caught up in violating a federal court order. Business agreements nationwide are being disrupted because nobody can do deals with Trump or his companies right now without risking contempt of court. Vendors and contractors who work with Trump properties are panicking because they do not know if they will get paid. Employees are worried about their paychecks. The entire empire is grinding to a halt, and Trump is powerless to stop it from happening. This ruling has stunned Trump's political base, who cannot believe that a judge has this much power over a president. It has halted key programs that were supposed to be rolled out, and it could trigger broader investigations and oversight into Trump's spending decisions going back months or even years. The political fallout from this is going to be massive, and we are only seeing the very beginning of it right now. Congressional leaders are already talking about emergency hearings and new legislation and potential impeachment proceedings depending on what else gets uncovered. And here is the part that should terrify Trump and everyone in his inner circle. This freeze is driving calls for legislative reform to limit future presidents' budget powers and tighten spending oversight permanently. What we are witnessing right now could fundamentally reshape the role of the president in budget and spending matters for generations to come. This is not just about Trump anymore. This is about rewriting the rules of presidential power itself. All right, so let us really dig into what happened here and why this matters so much, because the details of this story are absolutely critical to understanding just how bad this situation is for Trump and for the country. A federal judge looked at Trump's behavior and his refusal to comply with court orders and decided that drastic action was necessary to protect the integrity of the legal system and to ensure that assets would be available when judgments needed to be satisfied. What followed was one of the most sweeping court orders in American history that has effectively shut down both Trump's business empire and significant portions of the federal government. Judge Arthur Ingram is the name you need to remember because he is the one who signed this devastating order on November 9, 2025. The order was triggered specifically by Trump's failure to post hundreds of millions in bond that was required to delay enforcement of a fraud judgment against him. When defendants want to appeal judgments against them, they typically have to post a bond to ensure that if they lose the appeal, the money will be there to pay the judgment. Trump was ordered to post this bond, and he did not do it. Whether he could not come up with that much cash or whether he simply refused to comply is still being debated, but the result is the same. The judge decided Trump was not acting in good faith. And that is when Judge Ingram dropped the hammer with language that is absolutely brutal in its directness. He stated in his written order that Trump cannot be trusted with federal spending authority until he complies with the law and respects court orders. Think about what that means coming from a federal judge. This is not a partisan politician making an accusation. This is a member of the federal judiciary looking at the evidence and the behavior and concluding that the President of the United States cannot be trusted with the power he currently holds. That is an extraordinary statement, and it provided the legal foundation for everything that followed. Legal experts who have been analyzing this order are saying very clearly that this move prevents Trump from transferring assets to shell companies or hiding them offshore, which is exactly what wealthy defendants often try to do when they see legal trouble coming. The freeze locks everything down so that when the final judgments come due, there will actually be assets available to satisfy those judgments. Without this kind of freeze, Trump could potentially move money around or sell properties or restructure his holdings in ways that would make it impossible for creditors and judgment holders to collect what they are owed. The judge was not going to let that happen. The scope of this freeze, when you look at all the details, is truly breathtaking in its comprehensiveness. The Trump Organization is a sprawling business empire with holdings all across the country and connections to hundreds of other businesses and partnerships. All of it is now frozen under this order. Trump Tower, the iconic skyscraper in Manhattan that has been the headquarters and the symbol of Trump's business success for decades, is frozen. No sales, no transfers, no using it as collateral for loans. Mar-a-Lago, the Florida estate that Trump has used as his primary residence and as a private club that generates significant revenue, is frozen. Golf courses in multiple states that employ hundreds of people and bring in millions every year, frozen. Business ventures and licensing deals that generate passive income, frozen. But what makes this situation uniquely catastrophic is that the freeze extends beyond just Trump's personal business holdings to include his federal spending authority as the president. This is where things get really complicated and really problematic for the entire country. Federal agencies are now being told they cannot issue new grants or sign new contracts or process new benefits until this freeze is lifted. That means state governments waiting for infrastructure funding are stuck. Small businesses waiting for federal contracts are stuck. Veterans waiting for benefits are stuck. People waiting for disaster relief are stuck. The normal functioning of the federal government has been put on hold because of one man's legal troubles. The immediate economic impact of this freeze is already being felt across multiple sectors of the economy. Banks and Wall Street firms that do business with the Trump organization are freezing accounts and halting transactions because they do not want to be found in violation of a federal court order. Nobody wants to be the bank that gets held in contempt for processing a wire transfer that violated the asset freeze. So they are all shutting everything down and asking questions later. Business agreements nationwide that involve Trump or his companies are being disrupted because nobody can complete transactions that were already in progress. Vendors who supply goods and services to Trump properties are panicking because they do not know if they will get paid for work they have already done. Trump Organization employees are understandably worried about their jobs and their paychecks. When a company's assets are frozen, payroll becomes a serious problem very quickly. How do you pay employees when you cannot access company bank accounts without court permission? How do you keep operations running when you cannot pay your utility bills or your suppliers? These are not theoretical questions anymore. These are real problems that the Trump Organization is facing right now, and nobody has good answers yet. The political fallout from this ruling has been swift and severe. Trump's political base is absolutely stunned that a judge has this much power over a president who they believe was legitimately elected and should be able to govern without interference from the courts. They see this as judicial overreach and as part of a coordinated effort to destroy Trump politically. On the other side, Trump's opponents are celebrating this as long overdue accountability for someone who they believe has been flouting the law and abusing his power for years. The country is more divided than ever over this issue, and that division is only going to get worse as this situation develops. Congressional leaders from both parties are now talking about the need for emergency hearings to understand exactly what is happening and what it means for the separation of powers. Some are calling for legislation to clarify and possibly limit presidential budget authority to prevent this kind of situation from happening again in the future. Others are talking about potential impeachment proceedings if evidence emerges that Trump deliberately tried to hide assets or obstruct justice. The political ramifications of this freeze are going to play out over many months and could fundamentally change how we think about presidential power. Potential reforms to presidential budget powers are now being seriously discussed in ways they never were before. The unprecedented nature of this freeze has exposed vulnerabilities in our system that most people did not even know existed. How much control should a president have over federal spending? What checks and balances should exist to prevent abuse of that authority? What happens when a president's personal legal troubles interfere with their ability to govern effectively? These are not easy questions, but they are questions that Congress is now being forced to grapple with because of this situation. The freeze also raises serious questions about Trump's ability to continue functioning as president at all. If he cannot access federal spending authority, then how can he execute his duties as chief executive? If his business empire is paralyzed, then how does he avoid conflicts of interest when making decisions that might affect his frozen assets? If he is under this much legal pressure, then how can he focus on the job of being president? These are legitimate concerns that even some of his supporters are starting to voice privately. Legal experts are warning that this freeze could remain in place for months or even years, depending on how the underlying legal cases play out. Appeals take time. Fraud cases are complicated and involve massive amounts of evidence. Resolution is not going to happen quickly. And every day that this freeze remains in place is another day that Trump's empire is paralyzed and federal operations are disrupted. The longer this goes on, the more damage is done to both Trump personally and to the country as a whole. Banks and financial institutions are treating Trump Organization accounts with extreme caution right now. Any transaction that touches those accounts could potentially violate the freeze order and result in contempt charges. So the safest course of action from their perspective is to freeze everything and wait for explicit court permission before processing anything. This is creating a cascading effect where even transactions that might technically be allowed under the freeze order are getting blocked because banks do not want to take any risks. All right, let us break this entire situation down into the key points that matter most, because there is so much happening here that it can be overwhelming to process all at once. I want to make sure you understand exactly what has happened and what it means going forward and why this represents such a critical turning point in Trump's presidency and in American history more broadly. So let me walk through this systematically so you have a clear picture of where we stand. Point number one. The asset freeze is the most aggressive legal action ever taken against a sitting or former president in United States history. We have never seen anything like this before, where a president's entire business empire and federal spending authority are frozen by a single court order. This is not a minor restriction or a temporary hold on one account. This is a comprehensive lockdown of everything Trump owns and everything he controls as president. Trump Tower frozen, Mar-a-Lago frozen, golf courses frozen, business accounts frozen, federal spending authority frozen. The scope is absolutely unprecedented, and the implications are staggering. The practical effect of this freeze is that Trump cannot function as a businessman anymore, and his ability to function as president is severely compromised. Every financial decision now requires court approval. Every federal spending decision is on hold until the freeze is lifted. This gives the court enormous power over Trump's life and over the operations of the federal government. Whether you think this is justified or whether you think this is overreach depends on your view of Trump and his conduct, but either way, you have to acknowledge that this is an extraordinary situation with no clear historical precedent. Point number two, the freeze was triggered by Trump's failure to post a required bond and the judge's conclusion that Trump cannot be trusted with the authority he currently holds. When Trump failed to post hundreds of millions in bond to delay enforcement of a fraud judgment, the judge saw that as evidence of bad faith. And then when the judge looked at the broader pattern of Trump's behavior and his repeated refusal to comply with court orders, the judge came to a devastating conclusion. This person cannot be trusted with federal spending authority. That finding is what provided the legal basis for freezing not just Trump's personal assets, but also his presidential powers over the budget. Think about what it means when a federal judge makes that kind of determination about a sitting president. This is not a political opponent or a media critic saying Trump cannot be trusted. This is a member of the federal judiciary looking at evidence under oath and reaching a legal conclusion that Trump's behavior disqualifies him from exercising certain powers. Whether that conclusion will be upheld on appeal remains to be seen, but for now it stands, and it has real consequences that are being felt across the country. Point number three, the freeze has caused federal agencies to halt normal functions, which is creating chaos and hardship for millions of Americans. No new grants can be issued, which means state and local governments cannot access federal funding they were counting on. No new contracts can be signed, which means businesses that depend on federal work are stuck in limbo. No benefits can be processed, which means veterans and disabled Americans and others who depend on federal assistance are not getting what they need. The ripple effects of this freeze extend far beyond Trump personally and are affecting ordinary people who did nothing wrong. This is creating enormous pressure on Congress to act because constituents are calling their representatives and demanding to know why their benefits are frozen or why their state's infrastructure project has been put on hold. Lawmakers are being forced to choose between defending Trump and serving the immediate needs of their constituents. That is not an easy position to be in, and it is causing real divisions even within Trump's own party as members calculate what stance will best serve their political interests. Point number four. Banks and Wall Street firms are freezing Trump Organization accounts, which is disrupting business agreements nationwide and threatening the viability of the entire empire. When major financial institutions decide they cannot risk doing business with you because of legal complications, your options become very limited very quickly. The Trump Organization depends on banking relationships to function. It depends on lines of credit and wire transfers and normal financial services that we all take for granted. When those services get cut off because of a court order, the business cannot operate normally. Vendors and contractors are stuck not knowing if they will get paid. Employees are worried about their jobs. Partners and licensees are wondering if their agreements are still valid. The uncertainty alone is incredibly damaging even before we get to the actual financial losses from frozen accounts and disrupted transactions. This is how business empires collapse. Not all at once in a dramatic explosion, but slowly through 1,000 small disruptions that eventually add up to something catastrophic. Point number five. This freeze is driving calls for legislative reform to limit presidential budget powers, which could fundamentally reshape the presidency going forward. Lawmakers are looking at this situation and realizing that we have a structural problem. Presidents have too much unilateral control over federal spending without enough checks and balances to prevent abuse. This freeze has exposed that vulnerability in a very public and very dramatic way. Now, there is momentum building for reforms that would limit what future presidents can do with the budget and would create stronger oversight mechanisms. These potential reforms could include requiring congressional approval for certain types of spending decisions. They could include automatic judicial review when spending patterns appear irregular. They could include stronger financial disclosure requirements and more robust enforcement mechanisms. Whatever form these reforms take, they would represent a significant curtailment of presidential power in an area where presidents have traditionally had wide discretion. Trump's conduct and this court order may end up permanently changing the presidency itself. The immediate political impact of this freeze is that Trump's power has been crippled overnight in ways that will be very difficult to recover from. His financial resources are locked up, his federal spending authority is frozen, his business empire is paralyzed, his political operation is scrambling. This is not a situation that gets resolved quickly or easily. Appeals will take months. The underlying fraud case could take years. In the meantime, Trump is operating under constraints that no president has ever faced before, and it shows. His opponents smell blood in the water and are pushing for additional investigations and oversight. His supporters are rallying to defend him, but they are also increasingly worried about whether he can actually govern effectively under these circumstances. The 2026 midterm elections are coming, and this freeze will absolutely be a major issue in those campaigns. Democrats will point to it as evidence that Trump is unfit for office. Republicans will have to decide whether to defend him or distance themselves to protect their own electoral prospects. The bottom line is that Trump's presidency has been fundamentally altered by this court order, and there is no going back to the way things were before. Whether he survives this crisis politically remains to be seen, but one thing is certain: his power has been dramatically curtailed, and the implications of that will be felt for years to come. The judge has made his ruling, and now we all have to live with the consequences. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over, and the next chapters are going to be absolutely wild.